Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Songs and Sorcery. It is I, your host, Leonok, and I am here with another video of information that I think would be rather valuable to you in your everyday practice. I do want to apologize. It feels as though it has been quite some time since I've properly given a lecture, or I believe a video. The reason for that is because things have been a little bit interesting at the academy of where I teach professionally. If you all remember, I'm going to mention something that perhaps hasn't been mentioned in quite some time. We had some visitors at the university. Well, I guess at the academy a couple of days ago. The Magda sect decided to pay us a little visit, and they also believe that their followers should be allowed the privileges of teaching on school grounds and to enroll their students in, which is perfectly fine. We don't turn away any students, anyone who is willing to learn something. But given the nature of their ilk, their kind, I wasn't too happy to see them. I could tell something was afoot, but the rest of the board was like, look, we should give them the benefit of the doubt. They're still huge contributors to the society. They have ties. Well, I'm like, look, that was the old university. That was the old academy. We don't really associate with them that much anymore. But the university was like, I keep saying university, whatever. The school. The school was like, look, we know you have some history with them. They mean very well. They don't, by the way. And they just wish to, be a part of this sort of thing. So I was like, look, if you guys expect me to share the room with another Magda, then I want all of you to sort of, reassess what you're talking about. We're talking about a group of, religious zealots that, have this sort of, thing about their belief system, their tenet. They think everything is supposed to be a certain way. Things are specifically done this way or whatever. They are highly prejudicial to certain different kinds of groups. Do they contribute to the magical society? Of course. We receive donations from them. I say we as in the society, not the academy. We receive grants and everything else or whatever, but there's always that undertone of their belief systems being sort of mixed in. And because they have some sort of a, religious, I guess, strong authority within the governance of Antisha, it is becoming a bit of a problem. So one day I had a few new students of this sect enroll into my classes. I thought, you know what, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know what it is they're going through. I don't know what made them decide to, come to the dark side, according to them, and to learn what we have to offer. I think a week or two goes by, and I've noticed that the students have been behaving differently, and they don't really feel quite comfortable. I can sort of sense that sort of thing in them. And I was like, class, I get the impression that you all don't really feel too well or whatever. They were a bit sheepish about it, and then somebody from the Magda sect decided to speak up like, well, they're perhaps thinking about, the lecture you gave last week about, magic and blood and everything else, and they don't really think it's the proper way of doing things, maybe, or maybe they're not sure. I was like, where did this come from? This is not my class. And then it's also, but I remember this is where we go down that rabbit hole. They were like, I remember learning about, or according to what I was taught, it's supposed to be a certain way. It's supposed to be something that's, it's something to be controlled, not something to just, take its course. To some degree, they're correct. And when it comes to things like the spirits of that nature, they are meant to be, controlled as well, because it is how things are supposed to be. According to nature, everything else, laws of nature. I'm like, no, no. I was like, hard pause. His name is Damien, by the way. Damien, look, I understand that you have a certain belief about certain things that ally with your core beliefs and the organization that you represent. This classroom, like this academy, is a free organization. We teach, we learn many different aspects of the craft, of the magic of history. We have to consider all possibilities. Now, I am under the impression that you seek other motives as well as the rest of your organization. I am not like the other professors. I will act according to my own beliefs then. If I feel as though you are not behaving in a particular way that aligns with the core tenets of this class or this academy, I would not hesitate to make an example of you. And what you have to realize as well is that magic is something that can be controlled, yes, but to assume the same of nature and the spirits is not so. We cannot assume we know anything or everything when it comes to these sort of things. I was trying to be nice because I honestly was a bit I honestly was a bit upset at this sort of thing. I didn't really go any further. I didn't want to go any farther, and I sort of ended it at that. They met with me after class, and I said, "If you, never mind, I'm not going to get into it. This is being recorded." Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Songs and Sorcery. I am starting over again. That was very awkward. I am very happy to give you another episode today, another video. I'm going to be discussing something that is quite interesting. However, I would be remiss without bringing up my beautiful, lovely, and audacious co-host, Grimmy. Hello, Grimmy. How are you today? I know. The whole thing about Magda sort of just came out. I just thought I had to say something. Long story short, I don't like them. Okay, if you want to know more, look at my past YouTube videos. They are ripe with things about Magda and about their core beliefs and everything like that. I don't like them. Or whatever kids they put in my class. I don't like kids, period. But my particular class, they're like young adults, they're sort of older. They're able to handle more extreme forms of magic and theories. That is what I love. That's what I sort of like, the whole chaotic bit about it. The power, the diversity that is in, growing life and stuff. They're all like little flowers to me. I love all of you. So, I have to mention as well that, yes, I know it was awkward, but I feel as though I had to say something. I'm getting to that. So, my host is telling me to, hope we can get on with it because we sort of rambled a bit long enough, and I tend to agree. Now, this is summertime. The summer is now upon us. The solstice has happened. I'm not going to bother naming whatever the name is. I forgot what it is. Was it Litha? I don't know. I can't remember. I don't really, sort of honor these sort of celebrations, though I encourage all of you to, do so as you like. I like to remain a bit more of a free bird. I don't like being caged into a sort of tradition. That's not really my own. But if I feel the need to do so, like honoring the, passage of time or perhaps the solstice or even deities, I will do so according to my own, liking, because after all, I have to be in control of my own life. I have to maintain my sovereignty, which is something I urge all of my viewers to practice and to have. All right, so yes, Grimmy. Look, he's shaking. He's shaking. Stop it. You're insane. You're insane. So so without further more delay, let's just get into the bread and butter of the subject. I have something here that perhaps you guys have noticed. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And the elements that are used within this sort of, tool within certain practices has still been quite pervasive within our society and through immense society throughout the eons because of its adaptability, its use, and overall its significance within the, belief systems that, govern our societies, our religions, and our spiritual occultisms. Today, we're going to talk about the power of metal and its application in certain things. Specifically, the sword. Yes, I'm so excited. Now, I believe all of you may recognize what type of sword this is. That's right. Only a real one can find it. I know, and it did happen to me. Now I know there's some contention about the offer. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to get into the whole thing about the sword. Now, when it comes to the sword is a tool. First and foremost, its uses can vary depending on the wielder, depending on the user. A sword is primarily used to cut or pierce, to injure, or believed to even use as a lever in certain circumstances. It is a lever technically. It is a stick, a very hard metal, shiny, beautiful stick. Not as nice as mine though. And it is something that I believe has, been utilized within our civilizations for quite some time. Now, what is interesting to me is that when it comes to things like, the spellcraft, even in things like popular fantasy, and even in things like, our history, with, applying certain things in regards to the magical practice, I find as though the use of swords is quite lacking, and I'm a bit sad about it. But perhaps there may be some reasons as to why. Now, for those of you that understand about swords, they are weapons mostly known for weaponry. I mean, honestly, don't mean to call a spade, but this is a killing device. But it is a tool first and foremost, and its application can vary. Some swords have been used for ceremonial purposes. Some swords have been used to, commemorate certain things or to honor certain leaders or perhaps certain warriors in battle. An ornate piece, a decoration piece. There are certain societies that, certain types of swords were, given to certain kinds of people, and they, talk about certain kinds of ranks and importance. Swords had, relevancy, they had nobility, they spoke of, power and influence. Countries would wage war with these same tools, and politicians or belief leaders of their time would also use them as a conversation piece, as a, piece of authority. The sword itself, I'm going to be holding it like this because it can be a bit much. The sword in itself is a particularly amazing item. And it is one that I don't typically like to use too often because I tend to lean more towards something like the staff. It has a bit more significance, a bit more fun to me. But a sword is a bit more business. And business, as usual, is quite varied depending on what type of business it is. So when it comes to the, use of metals within swords, originally, people would use things like stone. They would hew them from, wherever the fuck they got them from. And they would sort of, have them being, milled and used and mined in a variety of ways. But then over time, they have found out that, stones can break other types of stones. And then those stones can break other harder types of stones. And at some point, you come across something like metal or iron. Okay? Now, when it comes to the use of, swords within the craft or within fantasy, it seems to be only limited to, people like soldiers, within, militant groups. It is also something that is used with, more physical things, but it's not really seen as a sort of spiritual thing to use in some cultures. Some people sort of have woven their spirits, their souls with these same weapons because of the significance and because of the overall effectiveness that these tools provide and what they sort of mean. These are tools that are designed for beauty or elegance, but they can be used to, take a life or to save a life. Double-edged sword kind of thing, pun intended. But when it comes to the application of metals within the craft itself, I find it as though the ones that people don't think about can be a bit lacking. The reason why I believe in fantasy, many people, especially, spellcasters, don't typically use swords in most of that I've seen, is because there's this idea that, their sort of magic cannot properly, I think, lend itself to the item in use. It can't sort of, meld itself with the properties that are contained within this tool. Because metal is seen as something that is sort of averse to things like magic, but I think it's different. And I think its application and use within magic is also different. And honestly, it has significance across many different kinds of cultures and belief systems. But the type of metal is also very important. But I think when it comes to, overall fantasy or things like role-playing games, for example, I think it's just to have a bit of fairness. Things like mages, people that use magic, were people that had to essentially fight from afar or from, mid-range. They can't really be given things like swords because they're not really trained to, in the martial arts. So giving them a weapon is a bit useless to them. However, there are certain swords within fantasy, within media, that have been sort of used as magical catalysts. Sometimes they have special types of enchantments placed upon them, whether it be a stone or a jewel or a gem of some kind, or perhaps a spell interwoven into the steel of the certain thing. Sometimes they have certain types of writings or runes upon the, haft of the blade in order to, give it sort of significance. Sometimes a spell invoking a certain power out of the blade itself. Other times as well, in the cultures, blades have been used to sort of, house the spirits. It becomes a home or perhaps a secondary body to the soul that once used it. And so it is something that is greatly significant within many types of, societies across the world, across, all worlds, really. But I think one of the issues when it comes to something like, what swords are typically used, well, swords that are typically made out of, is the element of steel. Steel is something that's essentially wrought from iron, and it is something that has been gone through a continuous process of, refining to a point where it sort of, some people say it sort of loses the essence of what it used to be. It sort of becomes this diluted element, but it has been hardened. It doesn't really have the, the raw energy that iron possesses. However, it still retains traces of it within its makeup, and those traces are essentially what can help us sort of route the energy back to its source, which is iron, which is earth. All metals essentially, if they're from here, attain the power and the energy of earth, something that is very strong, something that endures. And the metals, because they are not, like rock or stone particularly, they are a different type of earth technically. They have not only high durability, but they have high, um, what's the proper word? They can be used in a large variety of ways, and many of them can have different types of abilities or components associated with them. For the most part, when it comes to the metals in general, they are overall conductive, they are overall durable. Okay, metal over something like sand or dirt will tend to, last and is a bit more durable. However, given enough time, these things can sort of wither away. All the natural metals sort of do that. Things like silver over time, as an example, is one that is heavily used in things like magic because of its, significance within the craft or within the, beliefs surrounding it. It is a pure metal. It is a metal used for, purification rituals, for things like purging certain things, because of its association with things like the moon and the power that it has to, sort of purge darkness or purge evil. It comes out of the ground sometimes. It grows. There's something lively about it. And it's a type of metal that is, used in many different things. The types of salts or solvents that are within the silver metal is something that is used in photography. It is something that's also used for things like electrical companies or industries. And it is something that has been used in things like jewelry and even things like mirrors. And for those of you that know, when it comes to the laws or the myths behind things like vampires and not being able to see their reflections in the mirror, it's because vampires, one, being traditionally associated with something dark, evil, or negative, cannot sort of thrive wherever there's a purer element or source like silver. Back in the day, mirrors used to have a silver backing on the back of them, which is the reason why vampires weren't able to see themselves. Being creatures of the dark, their reflections didn't have weight, didn't have relevancy, didn't have legitimacy when they was faced with silver. And so that's why you weren't able to see them. That was sort of a calling card. It's sort of the reason why you weren't able to see vampires within there. They could sort of still see themselves within waters, and a certain, movies or media sort of portrays them differently, but that's sort of the reason why. Now, if water perhaps had trace elements of silver within it, then they couldn't see themselves within water. A lot of it also tends to lend itself to the belief as well that, they are cursed. They can't look at themselves. They sort of start to lose their identity. They cannot see themselves, so their relevancy within the world sort of starts to wither away and die. That is sort of the special thing about silver. But silver, like a metal, it is highly conductive. It is malleable because it is soft, which allows it the ability of adaptability. It is able to be bent, to be twisted, to be, formed into a variety of shapes, sizes, and with that, applications. So silver is something that is heavily used everywhere, but it was also used for things like weaponry. It was used for, evil deeds or things to, take lives away. But, it was something that was, eventually done away with because of how, it wasn't something you could use all the time when it came to things like battles or things like duels. You could refine it to a certain degree and strengthen it, but it still has the danger of bending and breaking under tremendous strain. Okay, but it is something that everyone can use for the magical practices or the craft. Now, when we have other metals, for example, things like bronze, bronze is something in contrast to silver. We could go into gold, but gold and silver are alike in many different ways. But gold has its own sort of thing that makes it especially unique. But when it comes to something like bronze, bronze is essentially the child of something like copper and tin. It's essentially a synthesis of two different types of metals, one of which is a solar metal, so it sort of has that, sort of radiant ability about it, and everything that sort of comes with copper. Copper is also something that is used for things like water as well, because it has it can withstand things like water rather well. It's something special about it. Something that, is a bit nicer to nature, things like plants and everything else. It tends to be, it's a softer metal, but it's a metal that has a sort of unique characteristic all on its own. Copper was as well used as a tool for things like, kitchenware, things like pots, pans, because it is highly conductive. The amount of heat that can be transferred through copper is insane, which is why it is also used in things like semiconductors or any other types of things that can involve an electrical current. It is something that can house energy, that can conduct energy, that can sort of reflect it. But it can absorb a huge amount of energy as well. I think it can absorb a lot more than silver can, and gold to a certain extent. You know, touching something that is very hot like copper can be very dangerous. But the thing is, when it comes to something like bronze, it has something like tin as well. Tin is a bit more earthly, and it has a bit more durable than something like copper. Now, when they're both together, both of those things sort of fuse into a stronger metal, but now it has sort of the properties of tin and the properties of copper. And so tin isn't like copper. Tin is a bit colder. It is a bit, it can be a bit malleable as well, but when you add something that's somewhat malleable with something else, they become a bit less malleable. They become a bit more sturdy, a bit more rigid. And so you're essentially giving something with the properties of the strength and the abilities of tin with the abilities of things like copper. And the unique thing about bronze as well is the fact that bronze is a type of metal that can inherit different, attributes and characteristics depending on what you merge with copper. It can be copper and tin. It can even be things like, what else? Not just tin, even things like, you can even mix copper with something like, I think like zinc, or something else. I can't think of it right now. There's so many things I want to talk about. But that's how bronze works. Things like gold is perhaps the most malleable, the most known thing. Everyone uses it for the practices. It just eludes, luxury, divinity. It is a solar type of metal because of its, vibrant, warm, and bright yellow hues. It is something of immense value because it is so scarce, something that comes from, the sky, from space. It's a celestial type of stone, but part of it can be seen and found on Earth as well. But swords that were made of gold were mostly for ceremonial purposes or for ritualistic purposes. Gold isn't something you want to sort of use in combat because it is essentially a bit too malleable, a bit too adaptive, and it's a bit too valuable to use for combat. I mean, gold can break, gold can bend, and gold can sort of wither. But not like other types of metals. But honestly, though, I mean, surprisingly enough, it is non-toxic, which allows it to be, actually ingested, and it can actually promote some sort of health properties. Silver can as well, but the problem is that when you ingest too much silver, it has the ability of turning your skin blue, like this person. It can be rather bad. If you don't want to look like a Smurf, try not to eat silver. Okay. Does it have medicinal properties? Sure, but with limited doses. You have to be smart about this sort of thing. But gold, unlike other things, is perhaps the most malleable and ductile of the elements. So, and it is very dense as well. So it has some heft to it. But the reason why I brought up those is because when it comes to things like the sword, there was a reason why they were sort of left behind. But because they are seen as something more natural, something of value, people tend to use them in the craft. And it is a type of metal that spirits have known about for years, and that spirits are familiar with, things that the gods are familiar with. It's within the mythology. But I believe the metal in particular that I wanted to talk about in this episode is one that I don't think I see too many people utilizing it for what it does for the craft. Most people use it for, ceremonial purposes, but it can be used for other things as well, and its significance. Stainless steel is a particular type of metal I think isn't really regarded as something that is, I believe, quite valuable. Stainless steel is a type of steel that has been sort of gone through a process of folding, of melding, of banging, of folding, of melding. It goes through an extraneous process over a very long amount of time. But over time, this constant pressure, this constant heat will sort of help forge the steel into something different, something stronger and far more durable. And when it's polished, it is quite reflective, like silver, things like glass. Stainless steel, is something that has a wide amount of uses. Now, the thing is with stainless steel, once it hardens, it can be very hard to bend, depending on how much layers of the element itself was used for it. But steel itself is quite dense. But stainless steel, though it can be used for weaponry and for things like tools, things like kitchen knives or whatever, you know, can be quite useful when it comes to things like the magical practices. Now, when it comes to things like fantasy, steel was something that we don't sort of, would sort of nullify magic. And I believe the reason for that is because it's so diluted from its natural source. Oh, sorry. It doesn't have the familiarity with the magic and the energy associated with it. So there's sort of this alienation. However, because of its highly reflective surface, it also has the ability to sort of reflect and to deter certain types of magic or even things like spells, which is interesting because it isn't used effectively in combat, especially against magic. Swords of a stainless steel type or any sort of steel type of a reflective kind can be widely used to not only nullify and cut certain things of magic, but it is used as well as a deterrent for things like evil or whatever, because of its association with things like silver, things like steel, something as reflective. Things like mirrors can also be used to sort of deter spirits or negative energies, a way it has been used in magical practices for those same purposes. When it comes to something like steel, again, as an example, when it's forged into something like a sword or a tool of a certain kind, it can still be used to sort of cut, to stab. It can be used to take life. It can be a warning to adverse spirits, whether living or dead. You sort of treat everyone with a level of distance, or I believe, respect when they have something like this at their side. It is a weapon, of course, and it is also a tool. But when it comes to sort of more ceremonial or religious or ritualistic purposes, it is something that can be, used to, create a barrier. It can be used to set a line. It can be used to distance or keep certain spirits like fairies away if they're bothering you, things like the fae. But it can also be used to sort of call, spirits of warriors. It can also be used to, call the attention of the gods. And metal, because it is conductive, still, it is able to harness certain types of energies, things like heat, mostly things like electricity. It can sort of travel, it can sort of use it. It is a channel. And so, with that in mind, it is something that can be absolutely used for magical purposes. And it's something that I encourage to be used. Now, things like athames, knives, pretty much, that are used for ritualistic or ceremonial purposes, are made of various types of metals, even things like stones or even things like gems. It can take some time to make them, but it is possible. But it is the overall shape and the use of the blade itself, of the ceremonial knife, that sort of is, it sort of calls to mind everything that's associated with the blade. But because it has these sort of, raw natural properties woven into or polished into the blade, because it is made out of something a bit more closer to the element of earth and all the energies associated with it, it tends to have a bit more, I think, magical or practical use with things like spirits or the energies. Something that is heavily processed like steel, though important, some will argue that it does not. But what I suggest as well is that because it is something that is very durable and can conduct certain types of energies, it is something that I believe can be hewn or used for things like protective charms, not just things like silver. Even things like a weapon, carrying a dagger on you, because it is made of this specific type of element, of this specific type of material. It sort of can be used as a ward. It can be used to sort of keep certain things at bay. It can also be used to sort of protect certain things. The uses of things like knives or anything made of things like stainless steel, as an example, can be very varied. But I think not utilizing a knife, I guess, as a protective charm, or I guess as a sort of a ward of a specific type, I think it's something that is not really talked about from what I hear, granted, or something that is practically used within the craft. But people do use it for ceremonial purposes, but it can be used for practical ones as well. But like I said, it's limited by the user, by the wielder. But it is something that I believe is quite important and that bears great significance. So, for example, if you want to sort of, keep certain spells away, you can use a sword or use something highly reflective, they even make appliances out of the same certain type of metal. So when it comes to something like stainless steel, the properties of stainless steel are this. It is somewhat conductive. It is a metal after all, so it is conductive, period. But it is incredibly durable, far more durable than something like silver or gold. So it's practical to use for things like defensive magic or things like defensive spells or charms. And because when it is polished, it is highly reflective, it also amplifies that sort of effect as well. It can be used for things like stability. They use steel beams to, provide stability for things like buildings or any kind of things like structures. And steel can also be used for that sort of thing as well. So, but you have to be sort of smart in how you're going to be using that type of element for your workings, because not certain types of spirits, certain types of energies may not exactly vibe with the element of metal or stainless steel. But perhaps you want to use something else. And let's say, for example, you have a recipe or perhaps a certain type of thing that calls for something like silver, but you don't have it because silver can be quite expensive, despite the fact that it is not as durable and that it can wear over time. It doesn't last as long. Its lifespan is not as long as stainless steel. Stainless steel can last for centuries, and its application, its durability can also last for centuries. Gold and silver don't necessarily have that, and despite them being incredibly valuable, stainless steel is just a lot more durable, and it's a lot more practical for things like defense, for things like attacking, or for things like tools or anything else. It is also conductive, so it is able to sort of hold certain types of energies or to reflect them or to, short them out or things like that. And it can also be used to sort of, split the veil or to allow certain things in, or, steel can also be used to sort of, cut, stab, or whatever. But if you apply heat to steel, it can be used to cauterize certain ways or to close things up. But it just needs the energy and the application to use. So I think with that, I will conclude that stainless steel not only is quite useful as a tool, but it can be used for its properties associated with what it comes from. It is a diluted source of things like earth or things like steel or things like iron, but it still maintains some of that power. But due to its, durability, it can be used for something like defense, for things like structure, for things like strength, even things like power. So I urge you to sort of use the element of stainless steel, if it is stainless steel, for those purposes. You'd be surprised. I'm pretty sure, they make some protective charms now for it. It definitely has that, and you can actually use it in your everyday life as well if you need to do something. Stainless steel is there. It is incredibly useful and adaptable and malleable before it is hardened, mind you. If you're working with it, after it's done, forget it. It can be very hard, unless it's not as much as used. And let's not forget, things like steel or any kinds of metals have been used to forge things like crowns, as an example. Things that, bear great significance and power. Crowns talk about royalty. It talks about influence. It talks about power. The circle shape can have a lot of significance to it as well. It fits over the head and everything else. It's a lot easier to put on. But when it's made out of stainless steel, it is also quite durable. However, because this is a thinner type and not as much was used into forging this, it is slightly a bit more malleable and can, it is still ductile and everything else because of its association with steel, things like metal. But like I said, with the sword, with this, with pens, with knives, or anything else, do not fall asleep on things like steel. I urge all of you to sort of use that and to think about its applications and to rethink what you thought about it. If you can use something like silver, even things like gold, they have things like stainless steel with, the appearance of gold, even though it is not. And though it may not have the same energies as things like gold, it is sort of trying to be imitative. It's dense, like gold is dense. It can be highly polished and reflective, like gold can be. And its solar affiliation, though, is not authentic and maybe not there. It can still sort of call attention to those certain energy abilities, and it can sort of, be a sign to, work with. But, without further more delay, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I do hope that this video, though it did take some time to put out, I do apologize for that, can be something that sort of helped you sort of think about the element of metal differently when it comes to things like swords specifically, or anything like knives. I urge all of you to make sure you're practicing safety, whether it is sex or magic. Make sure that you're being kind to others, but not, letting them walk all over you. Remember to not surrender your sovereignty lightly. And remember that because it is summer, the solstice just happened, remember to have a bit of fun, but also remember to keep cool. And so I urge all of you to sort of, be kind, to rewind, to reassess and practice in excess greatness. I look forward to, all of you for the next video for my class. But you know what? Goodbyes are, parting is such sweet sorrow. But until next time, everyone, it is Alianok and Grinny. And, until next time, goodbye, everyone. And please don't do anything stupid or rash. It is not me, it's not my fault. Do not use my name in it, ever. Okay? I love all of you dearly. I'll see you whenever the hell this thing goes up, okay? Goodbye. Get out of here.